for example, so moral realism, concisely stated, is the idea that there are some moral sentences, some moral statements that are true independent of people's attitudes towards them. Uh, and so if you deny this, then you have to deny that statements of the like it's wrong to torture infants for fun and would be so even if everyone approved of it. You have to deny that that's true. And that seems, any argument for moral anti-realism is going to be less persuasive than the principle that it's wrong to torture infants for fun and would be so even if everyone approved of it.
Like, it's like theoretic. If we created a world where people experienced had an experience of well-being from just like ultimate well-being from torturing kids, would then torturing kids become like a moral fact that we ought to torture kids?
Yeah. Well, if it brought enough well-being, then yeah. I mean, and I think actually any plausible view is going to say this.
Yeah, so this is super interesting, and there's a lot to talk about. So Matthew makes the claim in support of moral realism. He claims that a moral fact would be something like, it is wrong to torture infants for fun, even if everybody approved of it. Right, but then later on, when asked, if someone received enough well-being, would it be okay to torture infants for fun? And he says yes. Okay, so it seems like there's a contradiction here. But if I want to give Matthew the benefit of the doubt, what I think he meant to say what he means when he says fun, is he just means minute amounts of pleasure, right? So if I were to rephrase his moral fact or whatever, it would be, it is wrong to torture infants for fun. It is wrong to torture infants for minute amounts of pleasure. Okay, but let's stick with that, right? And then we'll go to, but then we'll go to this aspect, right, where it's okay if the pleasure is high enough. I want to sort of challenge that a little bit, because so I've seen Mathew bring up this hypothetical before with the dust specks, torture versus dust specks. So the question on the table is, you have someone being tortured, and then you have, a gajubadillion, some huge amount of number of people just getting dust specks in their eye, right? And eventually the dust specks, even if it's just 1 point, so let's say the person getting tortured is getting tortured by like a trillion point suffering, right? But eventually you get enough people with dust specks, and each person is experiencing 1 point suffering, eventually you get to a number that's higher than the trillion. You get to like 2 trillion, whatever. So the question on the table, right, is it better to stop the dust specks, or is it better to stop the one person getting tortured? And Matthew actually makes the argument that it's better to stop the dust specks in their eyes, right? So this is the purpose of sort of that tangent. If the moral fact is that it is wrong to torture infants for fun, even if everybody approved of it, well, let's talk about approval. I would imagine that approval, there exists some sort of amount of pleasure from that, right? Even if it's a small amount, even if it's minute, there is some aspect of pleasure by approving of something. Like, approval seems like, yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's okay, right? And there seems to be some amount of pleasure there, right? So if we're looking at the dust speck example, and we think it's right, if pleasure is high enough, Similar to how like getting rid of dust specks in people's eyes. Get enough approval, get enough people to approve, and eventually that threshold is crossed. So this reverts back to the first claim, and Matthew's made a contradiction here, where he is saying it is both okay and not okay to torture infants for fun. Yeah, maybe I'm missing something, but I just thought that was interesting. And another aspect is if he's using this to like as an example of like moral realism, I I don't think yeah especially going into like the dust specks example, I don't think people are gonna have the same intuition. Like he acts like this is an intuition that everybody has, but I don't think everybody has this intuition. So